They told everyone I was already dead, not with official announcements or obituaries in the paper, but with whispered conversations in hospital hallways, with quiet phone calls that ended in tears, with the soft, careful words people use when they are preparing for a loss that feels inevitable. And I lay in that narrow bed with tubes in my arms and a machine beeping next to me, counting my heartbeats like a clock ticking down, and I could hear them through the fog in my mind, through the Alzheimer that had already stolen so much of who I was. I could hear my daughter telling someone on the phone that I probably would not make it to the wedding, that they should go ahead with the plans without me, that it would be better to remember me as I was before all of this, before the confusion, before the sickness, before the slow, terrible unraveling of the woman who once baked 3 pies in one afternoon and never forgot a birthday. The wedding was 3 weeks away. My granddaughter, sweet girl with her father, eyes and my stubborn chin, was supposed to marry a man I had met only twice, because by the time they got engaged, I was already deep in the fog. Sometimes I recognized him. Sometimes I called him by the wrong name once I asked him if he was the mailman, and everyone laughed nervously and changed the subject. But in my clearer moments, I saw the kindness in his face, the way he held her hand, like it was something precious and breakable. And I whispered to myself, this one is good, this one will stay. And I wanted to be there when she walked down that aisle. I wanted to see the dress and smell the flowers and cry the way grandmothers are supposed to cry at weddings, but my body had other plans. It started with pneumonia, or maybe it started with Alzheimer, and the pneumonia just came along to finish what the disease had begun. I am not sure anymore how these things work. The days in the hospital blurred together, a parade of white coats and beeping machines and voices asking me if I knew what year it was, if I knew where I was, if I could remember my own name. And sometimes I could, and sometimes I could not. And on those days when I could not, I saw the defeat in my daughter's eyes, the way she turned away and pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from sobbing in front of me, as if I did not already know I was disappearing, as if the forgetting did not hurt me just as much as it hurt her. One morning, I heard her talking to my granddaughter outside my room. The door was cracked, just enough for sound to leak through like light under a threshold, and I heard my daughter's voice rough from crying, saying, "Honey, I do not think she is going to make it. The doctor said her lungs are failing, and with the Alzheimer, her body just does not have the strength to fight anymore." And my granddaughter, my sweet girl whose name sometimes escapes me, but whose presence I always recognize, said in a voice thick with tears, "So, what do we do? Mom, do we cancel everything?" And my daughter answered, "No, baby, you go ahead with the wedding she would want, that she would want you to be happy." And my granddaughter whispered, "But how can I be happy if she is not there?" That question echoed in my chest louder than any machine. How can I be happy if she is not there? I wanted to call out to tell her that happiness does not wait for perfect circumstances, that you grab it when it comes, even if everything around you is breaking. But my throat was dry and my voice had become a small, weak thing that rarely cooperated anymore. So I lay there silent, listening as they made plans for a future that did not include me, and I felt something sharp and desperate bloom in the center of my chest. A refusal, a rebellion against the narrative that I was already gone. The next few days were strange. I drifted in and out of consciousness like a boat untethered from its dock. Sometimes I woke to find my daughter sitting beside me, knitting or reading or just staring at the wall with the kind of exhausted stillness that comes from keeping vigil. And sometimes I woke alone with only the machines for company and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. Once I woke, convinced I was at my own wedding, that the hospital bed was a pew and the IV stand was a candelabra, and I called out for my husband, who has been dead for 12 years, and no one came to correct me. They just let me live in that moment until it passed, the way you let a child live in a dream. Then one afternoon, when the light coming through the window had that golden quality that makes everything look softer, I opened my eyes and saw something on the table beside my bed, a box. A small wooden box with a brass latch, the kind people use to store important papers or love letters, and I stared at it confused, because I did not remember it being there before, or maybe I had seen it 100 times and simply forgot. Either way, something about it tugged at me, persistent as a fishhook, and I reached out with a trembling hand and pulled it closer, my fingers fumbling with the latch until it clicked open. Inside was a letter. The envelope was cream-colored and slightly yellowed at the edges and across the front in handwriting. I knew as well as my own were the words, "For my mother to give to my daughter on her wedding day, if I am not there to do it myself," and my breath caught because that handwriting belonged to my son who died 4 years ago in a car accident that still does not feel real. Even now, even with Alzheimer's stealing my memories, the memory of losing him remains sharp and cruel like a knife that never dulls. I lifted the envelope with shaking hands. My son, my boy who was too young to die, who left behind a wife and a daughter and a mother who could not understand why the world kept turning when his had stopped. I had forgotten he existed. Some days, I had woken up and asked where he was, and watched my daughter face crumble as she reminded me gently that he was gone, but holding this letter brought him back in a flood of images his laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he used to fix things around my house without being asked, the way he called me every Sunday, even when he was busy, even when he was tired. I should have opened it right then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the sense that this letter was not meant for me alone, that it carried a weight too great to be borne in a hospital room with machines beeping and nurses walking by. Maybe it was the feeling that if I was going to give this to my granddaughter, it had to be in the right place at the right time. Or maybe it was just the stubborn flicker of life inside me that said, "You are not done yet. You have one more thing to do." And I slid the letter back into the box, closed the latch, and made a decision that probably seemed insane to anyone who knew how sick I was. I decided I was going to that wedding. The nurses did not believe me. When I told them, I remember the way the younger ones smiled indulgently and said, "Oh, honey, you just focus on getting better, and we will see." And I wanted to snap at her that I was old, not stupid, that I knew exactly how sick I was, but I also knew that sometimes the body listens to the will in ways that defy medical charts and prescriptions. I started refusing to drift. I started fighting to stay awake, to stay present when they brought me food. I ate even though everything tasted like cardboard when they asked me to do breathing exercises. I did them even though my lungs screamed in protest. I held onto the image of my granddaughter in a white dress like a lifeline. My daughter noticed the change. She came in one evening and found me sitting up in bed staring out the window instead of lying flat and half-conscious. And she said, "Mom, are you feeling better?" And I turned to her and said with as much clarity as I had felt in weeks, "I am going to the wedding." And her face did an odd thing. It crumpled and smoothed out again as if she was trying to decide whether to cry or laugh. And she said, "Mom, the wedding is in 10 days. The doctor said you might not even be out of here by then." And I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Then I will leave anyway." She did not argue. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe she saw something in my face that convinced her. I meant it, but she nodded slowly and said, "Okay, Mom, okay. If you are strong enough, we will get you there." And I felt a small, fierce victory bloom in my chest, because for once, Alzheimer and pneumonia and age were not going to win for once. I was going to be the one who decided what happened next, and I reached for her hand and squeezed it with what little strength I had left and whispered, "Thank you, Part 1. The days that followed were a battle. Every breath was work, every movement, a negotiation with a body that wanted to shut down and rest. But I kept the box with the letter on the table beside me where I could see it, and whenever I felt myself slipping back into the fog, I looked at it and remembered why I was fighting. I did not tell anyone about the letter, not even my daughter, because I was not entirely sure I could trust my own mind. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was a dream born from medication and exhaustion. But every time I opened the box, the letter was still there, solid and real, and I knew that whatever my son had written was meant to be delivered, and I was the only one who could do it. The doctor was less optimistic. He came in with his clipboard and his careful neutral expression and said, "I hear you are planning to attend your granddaughter wedding." And I said yes, and he said with the kind of patience people reserve for children and the very old, "I have to be honest with you. The risk of leaving the hospital in your condition is significant. You could have a relapse. You could," and he trailed off, leaving the unspoken words hanging in the air like smoke. "You could die." And I looked at him and said, "Then I will die at a wedding instead of in this bed, and that will be my choice." He did not approve, but he did not stop me. Either he made me sign papers releasing the hospital from responsibility he arranged for a portable oxygen tank and a wheelchair. He gave my daughter a list of warning signs to watch for and instructions on what what to do if I collapsed, and through it all, I sat quietly nodding when appropriate, but inside I was already gone. I was already at the church, watching my granddaughter walk down the aisle. I was already holding the letter in my hands, waiting for the right moment to give her the last words. Her father had written, "The morning of the wedding." I woke up early. The sun was barely up the sky, still that soft gray blue that comes before full light, and I felt surprisingly clear-headed. The fog that usually clouded my mind in the mornings had lifted just enough for me to remember where I was and why I was there and what I needed to do. I reached for the box, ran my fingers over the smooth wood, and whispered to my son, "Wherever he was, I am going to do this for you. I am going to make sure." She knows, and I do not know if he heard me, but saying the words out loud made them feel more real. My daughter arrived with a dress. Not the one I would have chosen if I had been in my right mind months ago, but a simple, soft blue dress that would not wrinkle too much in the wheelchair and would hide the fact that I had lost so much weight, my body now more bones than flesh. She helped me into it, her hands gentle as if I were made of glass, and maybe I was, and she brushed my hair, which had gone thin and white as dandelion fluff, and she put a little lipstick on me, and when I looked in the small mirror she held up, I barely recognized the woman staring back, but I smiled anyway because I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. We left the hospital just after noon. The nurse who had been taking care of me for the past 2 weeks hugged me carefully and said, "You are one stubborn lady, and I am rooting for you." And I felt tears prick my eyes, because kindness, when you are this fragile, when you are this close to the edge, feels like a hand reaching out in the dark. My daughter wheeled me out through the long hallways past other rooms filled with other people fighting their own battles, and I clutched the wooden box in my lap like a talisman, and I did not look back. The church was 40 minutes away. I dozed off twice during the drive, waking each time with a start, my heart pounding my hands, reaching instinctively for the box to make sure it was still there. And each time my daughter glanced at me in the rearview mirror and said, "It is okay, Mom, you are okay. We are almost there." And I nodded and focused on the passing scenery, trees and houses and shops, all of it familiar and foreign at once. The way the world looks when you are not sure if you will see it again after today. When we pulled up to the church, I saw the cars already lining the street, the people in their bright dresses and dark suits milling around the entrance, talking and laughing, and I felt a pang of something I could not quite name. It was not envy exactly, but a longing for the ease of their lives, for the certainty that they would wake up tomorrow and remember this day, while I might wake up and have no idea where I had been or what I had done if I woke up at all. But I pushed the thought away and let my daughter help me out of the car and into the wheelchair, and I held the box tight against my chest. We entered through a side door to avoid the crowd. My daughter had arranged it ahead of time, not wanting to cause a scene or distract from the bride, and we moved quietly through a narrow hallway that smelled of old wood and incense and something sweet I could not place, maybe candles or flowers, and I could hear music playing softly somewhere, the low murmur of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, and I thought, this is what life sounds like. When you are on the outside looking in. My daughter wheeled me into a small room off the main hall. It was dim and cool, with a single stained glass window casting colored light across the floor, red and blue and gold like jewels scattered on stone. And she said, "Mom, you can wait here until the ceremony starts, and then we will bring you in quietly so you can watch." And I nodded, but inside I was already planning something different. I was already thinking about the letter, about the moment I would stand, if I could stand and walk, if I could walk and deliver the message my son had entrusted to me. The ceremony began without me. I could hear it through the walls, the swell of music, the shuffle of feet, as everyone stood, the collective intake of breath as the bride appeared, and I closed my eyes and tried to picture it. My granddaughter in white, her face radiant and nervous, her hand on someone's arm walking toward the future, and I felt my chest tighten, not from the pneumonia, but from the overwhelming weight of love and loss tangled together so tightly I could not separate them, and I opened the box one more time and looked at the letter. The envelope was sealed. I had not opened. It had not read what my son had written because it was not meant for me. But sitting there in that quiet room with the sounds of the wedding filtering through the walls, I was tempted to break the seal to see his words one last time, to hear his voice, even if only in my head. But I resisted, because some promises are bigger than curiosity, and I had promised myself I would give this to her untouched, exactly as he had left it. Then, the door opened. My daughter poked her head in and whispered, "Mom, they are about to do the vows. Do you want me to wheel you out so you can see?" And I looked at her and then at the box, and I said, "No, I want to walk." And she stared at me as if I had suggested flying and said, "Mom, you can barely stand." And I said, "I know, but I am going to walk and I am going to give her this letter." And she opened her mouth to argue, but something in my face must have stopped her because she just nodded and came over to help me up. Standing was harder than I expected. My legs shook my lungs, protested the oxygen tank, pulled at the tube in my nose like a leash. But I gripped my daughter's arm and I stood, and I took one step, then another, and the world tilted slightly but did not collapse. And I kept moving forward through the door and into the hallway and toward the main hall, where my granddaughter was promising her life to someone while I carried the last words, sure of her father. When I pushed open the door to the main hall, the entire church turned to look at me. It was not a quiet entrance. It was not graceful. The door creaked. The wheelchair my daughter had abandoned in the side room clattered slightly as she rushed to help me, and suddenly all eyes were on the old woman in the blue dress, clutching a wooden box, shuffling slowly down the aisle with an oxygen tank trailing behind her like a ghost, and the music faltered. The officiant paused mid-sentence and my granddaughter turned and her face went white. She whispered something I could not hear from the distance. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears, and the man beside her, the groom, put a steadying hand on her back, and for a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The entire church seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Whether I would collapse, whether this was real, whether I was some kind of apparition conjured by collective grief and hope, and I kept walking, because stopping now would mean I had failed. Halfway down the aisle, I had to pause. My lungs were burning. My vision was starting to blur at the edges, and I felt my daughter grip my arm tighter and whisper, "Do you need to sit down?" And I shook my head. Even though I absolutely did need to sit down, I needed to lie down. I needed to be back in that hospital bed with the machines keeping me alive, but I also needed to finish this. I needed to deliver the letter, and so I kept moving one foot. In front of the other, the box pressed against my chest like a second heart. When I finally reached the front, my granddaughter broke away from the altar and rushed toward me. She wrapped her arms around me carefully as if I might shatter, and she was sobbing into my shoulder saying, "Grandma, oh my God, Grandma, they said you were dying. They said you would not make it. I thought I would never see you again." And I held her as tightly as my weak arms would allow, and I whispered, "I am here, baby. I am here, and I brought you something from your father." And at the mention of him, she pulled back her face, streaked with mascara, her eyes wide and disbelieving. I held out the box. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but she took it from me gently and stared at it as if it were a bomb or a treasure, she could not tell which. And she said, "What is this?" And I said, "Your father left a letter for you for your wedding day. He made me promise to give it to you if he could not be here himself." And her face crumpled all over again, and she clutched the box to her chest the way I had been doing, and she whispered, "I did not know. I did not know he did this." The officiant, a kind-looking man with silver hair, cleared his throat gently and said, "Would you like to read it now?" And my granddaughter looked at me, and then at her groom, and then at the sea of faces watching us, and she nodded, and with trembling fingers, she opened the box and pulled out the envelope and broke the seal. She unfolded the letter, and for a moment, she just stared at it. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were reading it in her head first, trying to process the words before speaking them aloud. And then she took a shaky breath and began to read out loud, her voice barely above a whisper at first, then growing stronger as she went. "My dearest girl, if you are reading this, it means I am not standing next to you on the most important day of your life, and I am so sorry. I wanted to walk you down the aisle. I wanted to dance with you at the reception. I wanted to embarrass you with a long speech about how proud I am, but life does not always give us what we want. So instead, I am leaving you these words." She paused, her throat working, and I could see her fighting to keep her composure. The church was utterly silent, not even the sound of breathing. It felt like the whole world had narrowed to this one moment, this one letter, these words crossing the boundary between life and death. "I want you to know that even though I am not there, I am still with you in the choices you make, in the love you give, in the way you stand up for what is right. I am in the stubbornness you inherited from me, and the kindness you learned from your mother, and the strength you got from your grandmother, who I know will move heaven and earth to be there for you today, even if her body is failing, even if her mind is clouded by Alzheimer. She loves you with a fierceness that nothing can erase, and if she is there, holding this letter, then she kept her promise to me, and that means something. My granddaughter looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. She reached for my hand and squeezed it, and I squeezed back with everything I had left, and she continued reading. Do not be sad that I am gone. Be grateful that we had the time. We did. Be grateful that you found someone who loves you, the way I loved your mother, the way my father loved my mother. Love is the only thing we leave behind that matters. Everything else turns to dust, but love echoes. It repeats itself in new forms, in new people, and as long as you carry me in your heart, I am still alive. I am still cheering for you. I am still so damn proud. She folded the letter carefully. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost tore the paper, and she looked at the groom, and then at me, and then at the entire congregation, and she said in a voice thick with emotion, my father wanted to be here today, and in a way he is, because my grandmother, who everyone said was too sick to come, who was supposed to be dying in a hospital bed, fought her way here to make sure I got his words. She kept a promise to a dead man, because that is what love does. It keeps going, even when it is hard, even when it seems impossible, and I do not know how to thank her, except to say that I will try to love. Like that, I will try to be that stubborn and that brave. The officiant was wiping his eyes. Half the congregation was openly weeping, including the groom, who had his arm around my granddaughter trying to hold her together while barely holding himself together. And I stood there feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me, and I thought, this is it. This is why I fought so hard. This is the reason I refused to die, because some things are more important than comfort. Some things are worth the pain. My daughter, who had been standing quietly behind me, leaned down and whispered, Mom, you did it. You can sit now. And I nodded and let her guide me to a chair. Someone had quickly brought forward, and I collapsed into it, my body finally giving in to the exhaustion, but my heart full in a way I had not felt in years, maybe ever, because I had done what my son asked. I had carried his love across the divide and placed it into his daughter's hands, and that was enough. Part 2. After I sat down, the ceremony continued, but everything had changed. The mood had shifted from celebration to something deeper, something raw and sacred. The officiant spoke about love and loss, about the way grief and joy can exist in the same moment, about how life is precious, precisely because it is fragile, and everyone listened with the kind of attention people give when they are confronted with mortality, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing reality in the form of an old woman with an oxygen tank sitting in the front row, holding on by sheer force of will. When my granddaughter and her groom exchanged vows, their words carried extra weight. She promised to love him in sickness and in health, and her eyes flicked toward me when she said it, as if she finally understood what those words really meant, as if she was seeing for the first time how love is not just about the good days, but about showing up on the hard ones too. And he promised to stand by her through loss and grief, and the moments when life does not make sense. And I thought, yes, that is it. That is what marriage is, not a fairy tale, but a commitment to keep choosing each other, even when the world falls apart. During the ring exchange, I felt myself starting to drift. The adrenaline that had carried me this far was ebbing away, leaving behind exhaustion so profound it felt like being underwater, and I could feel my mind beginning to slip the edges of the room, growing fuzzy, the faces around me blurring into indistinct shapes, and I panicked for a moment, thinking, no, not now. I have to stay present. I have to remember this, but Alzheimer does not care about what you want. It takes what it wants, when it wants. And I felt the fog rolling in thick and cold. My daughter must have noticed because she leaned close and whispered, Mom, stay with me, just a little longer. And I nodded and focused on my granddaughter, face her smile, her tears the way her hands shook slightly as she slid the ring onto her husband's finger, and I repeated her name in my head over and over like a prayer, trying to anchor myself to this moment, to burn it into whatever part of my brain was still functioning, so that maybe, just maybe, I could hold on to it later when everything else was gone. Then came the kiss, The officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," and the groom cupped my granddaughter face in his hands and kissed her gently, and the church erupted in applause and cheers, and I clapped too, my hands barely making a sound because I had so little strength left, but I clapped because this was a moment worth celebrating, even in the middle of grief, even in the shadow of death, and my granddaughter turned to face the congregation, her face radiant, and she caught my eye and mouthed the words, "Thank you." And I nodded and thought I would do it all again 1,000 times over. The recessional was a blur. People were standing and clapping and throwing rice or flower petals. I could not tell which, and my granddaughter and her new husband walked back down the aisle hand in hand, stopping briefly to hug me on their way out, and I felt her lips brush my cheek, and her whisper, "I love you, Grandma," and then they were gone, swept away by the tide of well-wishers, and I sat there feeling hollowed out and full at the same time. Someone asked if I needed to go back to the hospital. I think it was my daughter or maybe a nurse who had been hired to be on standby just in case, but I shook my head because I knew that if I left now, I would never make it back. And there was still the reception, still a few more hours of life happening around me, and I wanted to soak in as much of it as I could before my body finally gave out, so I let them wheel me to the reception hall a short distance away, and I sat at a table in the corner with my oxygen tank beside me like a faithful dog, and I watched. The reception was beautiful. There were lights strung across the ceiling like stars and tables covered in white cloths, and centerpieces made of flowers I could not name, and food that smelled wonderful, even though I had no appetite, and music that made people get up and dance and laugh and forget for a little while that life is short and fragile. I watched my granddaughter dance with her husband, their bodies swaying in time to a song I did not recognize, and I thought about my own wedding a lifetime ago, when I was young and strong and had no idea what was coming. People came to my table to say hello. Some I recognized, cousins or old friends or neighbors from years past, and some were strangers to me, though they clearly knew who I was, and they all said the same things. "You are so brave. You gave us all a gift today. Your son would be so proud." And I smiled and nodded and thanked them, even though half the time I was not entirely sure what they were talking about. The fog in my mind thickened and thinned unpredictably, and I had to work hard to stay tethered to the present moment. At some point, my granddaughter came over and knelt beside my chair. She was still in her wedding dress, her makeup slightly smudged from crying, and she took my hand in both of hers and said, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" And I said, "Of course." And she said, "Did you read the letter before you gave it to me?" And I shook my head and said, "No, it was not meant for me. It was meant for you." And she smiled through fresh tears and said, "Do you want to know what else it said?" I hesitated because part of me was afraid that knowing would make the grief sharper. But another part of me, the part that was still fighting to stay present, wanted to hear my son's words even secondhand. So I nodded, and she pulled the letter from a small bag she had been carrying, and she read it again this time. Just for me, her voice soft and halting. "Tell my mother that she is the strongest person I have ever known. Tell her that watching her fight Alzheimer with grace and stubbornness taught me how to face my own fears. Tell her that even when she forgets my name, I will never forget hers, and that wherever I am watching over both of you." I felt something crack open inside me. Not a breaking, but an opening like a door I did not know was locked suddenly, swinging wide, and the tears came hot and fast and unstoppable, and my granddaughter held my hand and cried with me, and for a few minutes we were just two women connected by love and loss, sitting in the middle of a party grieving and celebrating at the same time, because that is what life is, a messy, contradictory, beautiful thing that does not wait for you to be ready. After a while, she wiped her eyes and kissed my forehead and went back to her guests, and I sat there feeling lighter somehow, as if delivering the letter had also delivered me from a burden I did not know I was carrying. My son was gone, and I was forgetting, and none of that was fair, but I had kept my promise, and that mattered. It mattered more than I could put into words. Now, if you are still with me listening to this long, winding story, maybe you are sitting in a room somewhere, feeling the weight of your own losses. Maybe you have watched someone you love disappear into Alzheimer, or maybe you have felt it happening to yourself. The slow erosion of memory, the confusion, the fear of becoming a burden, and maybe you are wondering if any of it matters, if love can really survive when the mind that holds it starts to fail. And I am here to tell you that it does. It absolutely does. Because love is not just stored in memory. It is stored in action, in promises. kept in letters delivered in the decision to get out of a hospital bed and fight your way to a wedding, even when your body is begging you to stop. Here is what I want you to do. If this story has touched you in any way, I want you to take a moment and think about the people in your life who are fighting battles. You cannot see the ones whose minds are slipping or whose bodies are failing or who are just so tired they do not know how they are going to make it through another day. And I want you to leave a message here for them. You do not have to use their names. You can just write something simple like "I see you and I am still here," or maybe you want to use these words: "I honor the fighters who show up, even when it is hard." Just copy and paste that if it is easier. I honor the fighters who show up even when it is hard. Because when you leave those words, you are creating a space where other people who feel invisible and forgotten can come and know that someone understands. Do not underestimate how powerful that is. In a world that often turns away from pain and aging and decline, your willingness to witness it, to name it, to honor it, can be a lifeline for someone else. And maybe it will remind you that your own struggle is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be acknowledged and even celebrated, because you are still here, still showing up, still loving, even when it is the hardest thing you have ever done. Part 3. The reception wound down as the evening stretched into night. The lights that had looked so magical earlier now seemed harsh, and I felt myself fading in and out of awareness like a radio losing its signal. I would be present for a moment watching people dance or listening to a toast, and then suddenly I would blink and find myself somewhere else in my mind, at my son's funeral, or at my own wedding, or in a kitchen. I did not recognize baking bread with someone whose face I could not see, and then I would blink again and be back at the reception, disoriented and exhausted. My daughter stayed close. She had pulled a chair up next to mine, and every time I drifted, she would gently touch my arm and say, "Mom, you are okay. You are at the wedding." And I would nod and try to hold on, but it was getting harder. The fog was winning, and I knew that my body had given everything it had just to get me here, and now it was demanding payment, and the payment was steep. At one point, I asked my daughter where we were, and she said, "We are at Emma, wedding mom, remember?" And I looked around at the decorations, the people, the bride in the distance, and I said, "Who is Emma?" And I saw the pain flash across her face, quick and sharp, before she smoothed it away and said, "Your granddaughter, Mom, the one you brought the letter for." And slowly, like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, the memory came back. Not all of it, but enough. And I whispered, "Oh yes, the letter." I gave her the letter, and my daughter nodded and said, "Yes, Mom, you did. And you were amazing." I wanted to stay until the very end. I wanted to see my granddaughter leave in a flurry of sparklers and well wishes to start her new life. But my body had other plans. Around 9 o'clock. My breathing became labored. The oxygen tank was not enough anymore, and my daughter signaled to someone, maybe the nurse, maybe just a family member with medical training, and suddenly there were hands helping me into the wheelchair and voices saying, "We need to get her back to the hospital." And I tried to protest, but the words would not come. My lungs were too busy fighting for air. My granddaughter appeared at my side, still in her wedding dress. She leaned down, so her face was level with mine, and she said, "Grandma, thank you for coming. Thank you for the letter. Thank you for everything." And I reached up with a shaking hand and touched her cheek. And I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to tell her to be happy, to hold on to love, to remember that life is short and precious. But all I could manage was a whisper, "You are loved." And she nodded, tears streaming down her face, and said, "I know, Grandma. I know because of you. I know." They wheeled me out through a side exit to avoid causing a scene. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was my granddaughter standing in the middle of the reception hall, surrounded by lights and people and music. Her hand pressed against her heart as if she were trying to hold something in, or maybe trying to keep something from slipping away, and I thought, that is the image I want to take with me into whatever comes next. Her standing there, whole and happy and loved. The ride back to the hospital was a blur. I remember the sound of sirens at some point, though I am not sure if they were for me or someone else. I remember my daughter holding my hand and praying under her breath. I remember the lights of the emergency room bright and sterile after the warm glow of the reception. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is how it ends. not with a dramatic final speech or a moment of profound clarity, but with exhaustion and beeping machines and the slow fade to black. But I did not die that night. I do not know if that surprises you or disappoints you, because stories like this usually end with the hero giving everything they have for one last heroic act and then peacefully slipping away. But life does not follow narrative conventions the way stories do. I did not die that night or the next night or the night after that. I stabilized. They got my breathing under control. They pumped me full of antibiotics and fluids, and I woke up 3 days later back in my hospital bed with no clear memory of the wedding or the letter or any of it. My daughter told me what happened. She sat beside my bed and showed me pictures on her phone, me in the blue dress holding the wooden box, me standing at the front of the church, me sitting at the reception with the oxygen tank beside me, and I stared at those pictures like they were of a stranger because I had no memory of being there, none at all. Alzheimer had taken it the way it takes everything quietly and completely, and I felt a deep, aching grief because I had fought so hard to be present, and the disease had stolen it anyway. But then my daughter showed me a video. Someone had recorded the moment when my granddaughter read the letter aloud, and I watched it on the tiny screen of her phone. This old woman who looked like me, but did not feel like me, standing with a box in her hands, and my granddaughter crying and reading her father's words. And even though I could not remember being there, I could feel the weight of it, the importance of it, and I understood that whether I remembered or not, it had mattered. My granddaughter came to visit a few days later. She brought the letter with her, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve, and she sat beside my bed and read it to me again. And even though I had heard it before, or maybe I had not, I could not be sure anymore. It moved me to tears, and she said, "Grandma, even if you do not remember being there, I will remember for both of us. I will tell my children about the day their great-grandmother fought her way out of a hospital bed to deliver a letter from their grandfather, and that story will live on, even when we are all gone." And that is when I understood the twist. The real twist is not that I survived, or that I made it to the wedding, or even that I delivered the letter. The real twist is that memory is not the only thing that matters. Yes, Alzheimer steals my ability to hold on to moments to keep them safe in my mind, but it cannot steal the impact of those moments. It cannot erase the fact that I was there, that I did something that mattered, that I kept a promise, and even if I forget it entirely, other people will remember and they will carry it forward. And in that way, I will live on, not in my own mind, but in theirs. If you have made it this far in the story, you need to hear this. You might be afraid right now, afraid of forgetting or being forgotten, afraid that when your memory goes, you will lose everything that makes you who you are. And I will not lie to you. It is terrifying. There are days when I wake up and do not know my own name, days when the people I love most look like strangers, days when I feel like I am disappearing one piece at a time. But here is the truth. Underneath the fear, you are more than your memory. You are the things you have done, the love you have given, the promises you have kept, and those things echo forward in ways you cannot predict or control. So, if you are caring for someone with Alzheimer, or if you are living with it yourself, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. And the love you give matters even when you cannot remember giving it, especially when you cannot remember giving it, because that is when it is purest, when it is not about recognition or reward, but simply about showing up, about doing what needs to be done because it is right. And if you want to be part of a community that understands this, that holds space for the hard days and the scary moments, and the grief that does not have a clear beginning or end, then I invite you to stay here with us, not as a follower or a subscriber, but as a fellow traveler on this road. Every time a new story appears here, it will be another voice saying, "I see you. I understand you are not alone." And maybe that will be enough to help you take one more step forward, one more breath, one more day, because that is all any of us can do. Really, just keep going and trust that the love we leave behind will be enough. I have been in the hospital for 6 weeks now. Some days I know exactly where I am and why other days I think I am at home or at my son's house or in a place that does not exist outside my failing mind. But every day, without fail, my daughter comes and sits with me and tells me stories about the wedding, about my granddaughter, about the letter, and slowly those stories are becoming my memories, not the lived memories that that Alzheimer's stole, but new ones built from other people, recollections and photographs and videos. And maybe that is okay. Maybe memory does not have to be firsthand to be real. My granddaughter is pregnant. She told me last week, or maybe it was last month. Time is slippery for me now. And she said, "Grandma, you are going to be a great, great grandmother." And I smiled even though I was not entirely sure what that meant. And she showed me an ultrasound picture and said, "This baby is going to know all about you, about how you fought to be at my wedding, about the letter, about everything." And I felt something warm bloom in my chest. Not quite memory, but something close, hope maybe, or pride, or just love in its simplest form. I do not know how much time I have left. The doctors do not say it outright, but I can see it in their faces, in the way they speak gently and avoid making long-term plans. And I am okay with that. I have lived a long life, not an easy one, but a full one. I have loved and been loved. I have raised children and watched them grow. I have survived loss and grief and the slow dissolution of my own mind, and I have kept promises even when it cost me everything I had. So if this is the last story I tell, let it be this one. Let it be about a woman who refused to let death or disease or forgetfulness stop her from delivering a message of love. Let it be about a letter that crossed the boundary between life and death, carried by shaking hands and sheer stubborn will. Let it be about the way love echoes forward through generations, turning into stories, and then into legends, and finally into the quiet knowledge that we are all connected by the things we do for each other, especially when it is hard. And let it be a reminder to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, that you have the power to be someone better. You have the power to show up for the people you love, even when it is inconvenient or painful or scary. You have the power to fight through your own limitations and deliver something precious into someone else's hands. And when you do that, you become part of a chain of love that stretches backward and forward through time, connecting all of us in our struggle and our grace. Before I go, before the fog takes me completely, I want to say one more thing. To my granddaughter, if you ever hear this, I kept my promise. I brought you your father words, and I would do it again 1,000 times over. You are loved more than you know by people who are here and people who are gone. And that love is a shield and a light and a path forward, even when everything else is dark. And to you, the person listening, thank you for staying. Thank you for witnessing. Thank you for caring about an old woman's story when you could have been anywhere else, doing anything else. Your presence here matters more than you know, because it means that even in my forgetting, I am still being remembered. And that is all any of us really want in the end, to know that we mattered, that we were seen, that our love left a mark. So go now and leave your mark. Write those words. I honor the fighters who show up even when it is hard. Or write your own words, whatever feels true, and then go out into your life and show up for someone. Fight your way to their bedside or their wedding or their ordinary Tuesday and let them know they are not alone, because that is what we are here for, not to be perfect or to remember everything or to avoid pain, but to love each other through it all, to carry each other letters across impossible distances, and to keep showing up even when everything in us wants to give up. That is my story. That is my letter to you. And whether I remember telling it tomorrow or not, it is true, and it is yours now to carry forward however you see fit. Part 4. The weeks after the wedding blurred together in ways I cannot fully explain. Sometimes I would wake up and remember everything. The dress, the letter, the way my granddaughter's face looked when she read her father's words. And other times I would wake up convinced I had dreamed the whole thing, that I was still waiting for someone to tell me when the wedding would be, that I had failed to keep my promise. And those were the hardest mornings because my daughter would have to show me the pictures again and walk me through it all, like teaching a child a lesson they keep forgetting. And each time I relearned the story, I felt the loss of having lived it and lost it. But something had shifted in the family. People visited more often, not out of obligation, but out of something else. Maybe they had seen what it cost me to show up that day, and they wanted to honor that by showing up. For me, my granddaughter came twice a week, sometimes more, bringing magazines or cookies or just sitting quietly beside my bed, holding my hand and talking about her new life as a married woman. And even when I could not remember her name, I remembered the feeling of her, the warmth, the safety, the sense that I was loved by this person, even if I could not place exactly who she was. One afternoon, she brought a photo album. Not the wedding album, though that would come later, but a different one filled with pictures of her father, My son, and she sat beside me and slowly turned the pages, pointing to each photo and telling me stories about the man in them. And some of the stories I remembered with sharp clarity, like the time he fell out of a tree trying to rescue a cat that did not need rescuing, or the way he always burned toast, but refused to admit it was his fault. And other stories felt like they belonged to someone else. Life like I was hearing about a stranger, but I listened anyway because her voice was soothing, and the love in it was undeniable. She paused on one particular photo. It was my son, maybe 30 years old, standing in front of a house I recognized as the one he had lived in before he died, and he was holding a baby wrapped in a pink blanket, and my granddaughter said softly, "That is me, Grandma. He is holding me." And this was taken the day they brought me home from the hospital, and she pointed to the expression on his face, a mixture of terror and awe and exhaustion, and said he told Mom that he had never been so scared in his life because he was responsible for keeping this tiny person alive, and he did not know if he was good enough. I stared at the photo, and even though my memory of that day was gone, even though I could not recall being there or holding that baby myself, I could feel the weight of what she was describing because I had felt that same terror when I brought my own children home, the fear that I would fail them, that I would not be enough, and I reached out and touched the photo with one finger, tracing the outline of my son's face, and I whispered, "He was enough. He was more than enough." And my granddaughter started crying and said, "I know, Grandma. I know, and I wish I could tell him that moment is important for you to understand. Because this is what Alzheimer does. It does not just take your past. It takes your ability to reassure the people you love. It takes your capacity to tell them the things they need to hear. And so they are left holding all these questions and regrets with no way to resolve them. And the guilt of that, the knowledge that my confusion adds to their pain, is sometimes worse than the confusion itself, because I can see it in their faces, the exhaustion, the sadness, the quiet grief of losing me while I am still alive. But here is what I have learned in these long, strange months. You do not need a perfect memory to offer comfort. You do not need to remember every detail to tell someone they are loved. Sometimes, all it takes is a touch, a smile, a few words that come from some deep place that Alzheimer has not reached yet, and those moments, however brief, however disconnected from the larger narrative, are enough. They have to be enough because they are all we have. My daughter started keeping a journal. She told me about it one day when I was having a clearer moment. She said, "Mom, I am writing down everything. The things you say, the things we do together, the way you look when you are confused, and the way you look when you suddenly remember something." And I asked her why, and she said, "Because I do not want to forget, and I want your great-grandchildren to know who you really were. Not just the woman with Alzheimer, but the woman who fought through it, who showed up, who kept promises." And I felt tears slide down my cheeks, and I said, "Thank you." She read me some of the entries, sitting there beside my hospital bed with the afternoon light coming through the window, turning everything gold and soft. And some of the entries were funny, like the time I insisted the nurse was my sister from childhood and refused to believe otherwise. And some were heartbreaking, like the day I did not recognize my daughter at all and asked her repeatedly when my real family was coming to visit. And as she read, I felt a strange sensation like watching a movie about someone else's life, except occasionally I would recognize a moment or a feeling, and I would think, "Oh, that was me. I did that. I was there." The journal became a bridge between the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming, between the memories I had lost and the ones being created in real time. And I realized that this is what we do for each other. When someone is disappearing, we become their archivists, their record keepers. We hold on to the pieces they can no longer carry, and we promise to keep them safe. And that is its own kind of love, fierce and unglamorous and absolutely essential. Now, let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question. Have you been keeping track of the moments that matter? Not just the big ones like weddings and funerals, but the small ones, the ordinary Tuesday afternoon conversations, the inside jokes, the way someone laughs, or the meal they always cook when they are stressed. Because those details, those tiny fragments of a life, are what get lost first when memory fails. And if no one has written them down, if no one has made a record, then they disappear, as if they never existed at all. This is where I need you to do something important. If this story has made you think about someone you love, someone who is aging or struggling or slowly losing themselves, I want you to take a moment right now and write down one memory of them, just one. It does not have to be profound. It can be simple, like the way they take their coffee or the song they hum when they are doing dishes. And if you want, you can share it here. You can write something, like I am keeping the memories for someone I love, or you can write, I remember when followed by whatever detail feels precious to you. Do this not just for them, but for yourself. Because one day when they are gone, or when their memory has faded so much that they cannot access these moments anymore, you will have this record, and it will be a gift, a way of saying, I saw you, I paid attention, your life mattered enough for me to write it down. And that act of witnessing that deliberate choice to remember is one of the most powerful things you can do for another human being. Part 5. Around the 3rd month after the wedding, something unexpected happened. My health stabilized. I do not mean I got better. Alzheimer's does not work that way. And the pneumonia had done permanent damage to my lungs, but I stopped declining quite so rapidly. I reached a kind of plateau where I was still sick, still confused, still fading, but not as quickly as the doctors had predicted, and they could not really explain it. They talked about resilience and the unpredictability of the human body. But my daughter had a different theory. She said, Mom, I think you are still here because you are not done yet. I think there is something else you need to do. I did not know if I believed her, but I also could not shake the feeling that she was right, that somewhere in the fog of my mind, there was still a purpose, still a reason to keep fighting. And so I did. I kept waking up every morning, even when it was hard, even when the confusion was so thick I could barely see through it. I kept eating, even though food had lost most of its taste. I kept doing the breathing exercises and the physical therapy, and all the small tedious things that keep a body functioning, because some stubborn part of me refused to let go. My granddaughter visits became a routine. Every Tuesday and Friday, she would come sometimes with her husband, sometimes alone, and she would sit beside me and talk about her life, about the house they were fixing up, about the baby growing inside her, and she would ask me questions about my own life, trying to pull out memories that might still be hiding in the corners of my mind, and sometimes I could answer, and sometimes I could not. But either way, she stayed, and that constancy, that reliable presence became an anchor for me. One Friday, she came in looking different. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying, and she sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed and said, Grandma, I need to tell you something. And I felt a spike of fear, because those words in that tone never mean anything good, and I reached for her hand and said, What is it, baby? What is wrong? And she took a shaky breath and said, I am scared. I am so scared that I am going to forget him, that I am going to forget my dad, the way you are forgetting everything, and I do not know how to carry that. I did not have an easy answer for her, because the truth is she might forget not everything, maybe, but pieces. The sound of his voice, the way he smelled, the specific cadence of his laugh. Those details fade with time, even for people who do not have Alzheimer's, and I could not promise her that she would hold on to him forever, because I did not know if that was true, but I could tell her what I had learned. And so I said softly, You will forget some things, that is just what happens, but you will also remember the important parts, the love, the lessons, the way he shaped who you are, and those things do not disappear. They become part of you so deep that even forgetting cannot touch them. She cried. She put her head down on the edge of my bed and sobbed, and I stroked her hair the way I used to when she was little, and I did not say anything else because sometimes there are no more words. Sometimes all you can do is sit with someone in their pain and let them know they are not alone, and we stayed like that for a long time, her crying and me holding her until finally she lifted her head and wiped her eyes and said, Thank you, Grandma. And I said, For what? And she said, For still being here, for not giving up. That conversation stayed with me, even after she left. Even after I forgot the specific words we had said, I remembered the feeling of it, the weight and the importance. And I thought about what my daughter had said about me still being here for a reason. And I wondered if this was it. If my purpose now was not to do grand dramatic things like showing up at weddings, but simply to be present to let the people I love know through my continued existence, however diminished, that they are not alone in their fear of forgetting. The baby was born on a Tuesday. My daughter came rushing in that morning, breathless and smiling, and said, Mom, you are a great-great-grandmother. She had the baby this morning, a little girl, and they are both healthy. And I stared at her, trying to process the information, trying to connect it to something concrete. And I said, Who had a baby? And she said, Emma, Mom, your granddaughter, remember? And slowly the pieces clicked into place. and I said, "Oh, yes, Emma," and I felt a flutter of something, joy maybe, or pride, or just the simple gladness of knowing that life was continuing, that the chain was not broken. They brought the baby to see me 2 days later. My granddaughter walked in, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft yellow blankets, and she said, "Grandma, I want you to meet someone. This is Claire." And she sat down beside me and carefully placed the baby in my arms, and I looked down at this tiny, scrunched-up face, and I felt something crack open inside me. Not sadness this time, but something else. Something almost like relief, because here was proof that life goes on, that even in the middle of loss and decline and forgetting, there is still new life, still hope, still a future. The baby was named after my mother. My granddaughter told me that, and I felt tears prick my eyes because I had not thought about my mother in so long. The Alzheimer had taken her from me early on, erased her face, her voice, the sound of her singing while she did dishes, but hearing her name again brought back a flash. A brief bright image of her hands wrinkled and strong, kneading bread dough in a kitchen filled with morning light. And I whispered, she would have been so proud. And my granddaughter said, "I know, Grandma. That is why I chose it. I wanted to keep her alive somehow." We sat together for a while, me holding the baby, my granddaughter beside me, her hand resting on my arm, and I thought about all the women who had come before me, my mother, her mother stretching back through generations of women who had loved and lost and kept going, and I thought about all the women who would come after this baby, her daughters, maybe her granddaughters carrying forward something essential, even if they did not know exactly what it was, and I felt connected to something larger than myself, larger than my failing memory, part of a chain that stretched backward and forward through time. I do not know how much longer I will be here. The doctors still will not give me a timeline, but I can feel it myself the way my body is, slowly shutting down the way the fog in my mind gets thicker and stays longer, the way even the good days are becoming fewer and farther between. And I am not afraid exactly, but I am tired, so very tired, and I am ready for whatever comes next. But I am also grateful for the time I have had, for the moments I got to experience, even if I cannot hold on to them. If you are still with me, if you have stayed through this entire long, winding story, then you understand something important. You understand that life is not about perfect memory or perfect health or perfect anything. It is about showing up. It is about keeping promises. It is about loving people, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. And it is about creating moments that matter, even if you are the only one who will remember them, because someone has to bear witness. Someone has to say, "This happened, this was real, this was worth it." And if you are facing your own battle with memory loss or watching someone you love go through it, I want you to know that you are doing better than you think. You are stronger than you know. The fact that you are still here, still trying, still showing up, even on the days when it feels impossible, that is heroism. That is love in its purest form, and it deserves to be acknowledged and celebrated, not hidden away in shame or silence. So here is my final invitation to you. If you want to be part of a community that sees you, that understands what you are going through, that will hold space for your fear and your grief and your exhaustion, then stay here with us. Subscribe, not because you have to, but because you want to, because you need a place where you can come and remember that you are not alone, where every story is a reminder that other people have walked this road and survived it, and where your own story, whatever it is, will be honored and witnessed. Every time you come back here, every time you watch another story or leave another comment, you are choosing connection over isolation. You are choosing to be part of something bigger than yourself. And in a world that often turns away from pain and difficulty and decline, that choice matters. It ripples outward, touching people you will never meet, giving them permission to keep going, to keep fighting, to keep loving even when everything in them wants to give up. I have told you my story. I have given you everything I have, and now it is yours to carry forward, to share with others who might need it, to let it remind you on the hard days that love is stronger than forgetting, that promises kept matter more than perfect memory, and that showing up even when you are falling apart is the bravest thing any of us can do. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being part of this moment with me. And remember, wherever you are, whatever you are facing, you are not alone. You have never been alone, and the love you give today will echo forward long after you are gone in ways you cannot predict or control, becoming part of the great endless chain that connects all of us in our struggle and in our grace.